Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about Pokemon Legends ZA. It's been a little while since we've spoken on this game, but now it's looking like we're going to be getting some substantial official news about this game fairly soon, and there's also some interesting tidbits that have come out over the last couple of months, and perhaps some leaks as well, that are painting a very compelling picture, not just for the future of Legends ZA, but for the series overall. It's looking like Game Freak and Pokemon Company are finally starting to listen to fans on what should be done regarding the series. So we'll be getting into all of this today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So there will be a variety of things that we'll be discussing here when it has to do with Pokemon Legends ZA. But the first thing I want to discuss here are some leaks that came out a couple months ago regarding the timing of Pokemon Legends ZA. So here, Central Leaks was sharing out some information from the Riddler. For those unfamiliar with the Riddler, they're considered to be a long-time leaker when it comes to Pokemon news. Of course, still take it with a grain of salt because their credibility has been called into question more recently, but that long history of leaking different Pokemon details still remains. So what's being said here, Pokemon Legends ZA won't be out in early 2025. Still plenty of time to go. Pokemon TCG Pocket is their big game for this year, and Gen 10 is coming in 2026 for the 30th anniversary. So, some big points here. The main one being that Pokemon Legends ZA won't be out in early 2025. So, this was personally expected by me based off how they showed off that initial trailer. They just told us 2025. When you go back to that first trailer for Pokemon Legends Arceus, they told us it was coming out in the beginning of its respective year, 2022. And even going back to last year regarding the wording when it has to do with the DLC for Scarlet and Violet, it was very accurate. So given recent history, I would be paying extra close attention to what they tell us about the release timing here. So if they don't say early 2025, I don't think it's early 2025, and here we have these potential leaks that seem to support that notion. Now, if this is the case though, then this strongly suggests that Legends ZA will be the premier Pokemon title for 2025, and that the 3-year gaps we've been seeing for Pokemon generations, that pattern we've seen for a long while already, will finally be breaking, which is also what's being leaked here as well, that Gen 10, the next generation, will come out in 2026 in time for the 30th anniversary. Which also makes a lot of sense. I don't like putting too much stock into different anniversary times, but the 30th anniversary is a fairly major one, and we have seen Pokemon Company take great advantage of the different anniversaries to celebrate Pokemon. I mean, they celebrate the history of Pokemon every year pretty much, but for these milestone years, they push things just a little bit harder. So Gen 10, a clean 10 for the 30th anniversary, in the early parts of a new generation for Nintendo, because we're expecting Switch 2 to come out sometime next year, I definitely expect them to take full advantage of this. And everything seems to be lining up here with Legends ZA taking the forefront for the 2025 release. And as of this recording, it's mid-July, we already got the Nintendo Direct last month, there's been no surprise announcements for any sort of other Pokemon release to come out this year. And while I do think there's going to be more news next month in a Pokemon Presents, which we will be discussing more so in a moment here, I do think we're at a point where we can start to operate under the assumption that there will not be a mainline Pokemon release this year. Meaning, Game Freak is finally taking a break. They're finally spacing out the releases and giving their development teams a little bit more leg room to put together a quality product, which is what the majority of Pokemon fans have been waiting for a very long time. So this bodes really well for the quality of Legends ZA next year. I already felt like Legends Arceus was one of the best Pokemon games we've seen in a very long time, and with a little bit more time in the oven, with a little bit more focus placed on it, I think it's going to be spectacular. And I think the same could even be said for Gen 10 in 2026. Scarlet and Violet definitely pushed some things in some directions, but clearly the game needed more time for a variety of reasons. Perhaps with the extra time and more experience with the new style of Pokemon, Gen 10 will also hit it out of the park. That's me being optimistic, but Pokemon Company is now giving us reasons to be optimistic. But I think with Pokemon Legends ZA, there will be more about this game that will satisfy a lot of fans. And I think we're going to start to learn more about this next month in a Pokemon Presents. Now, why do I think that? I understand we already had one Pokemon Presents this year. Well, the reason why is because there is a history of multiple Pokemon Presents happening in a year. And actually, over the last 3 years, we've seen Pokemon Presents not only in the beginning of the year, but also in August. In 2021, it was on the 18th of August. In 2022, we had the second one, Pokemon Presents, in the beginning, August 3rd. And then in 2023, August 8th. So in the last 3 years, there has been a Pokemon Presents. That is a pretty good pattern. And given that we should likely learn more about Legends ZA at some point, and perhaps they also should be talking more about that Pokemon TCG Pocket that they're going to be releasing, a Presents this August makes a great deal of sense. Now, in terms of when in August we might see this Presents, there's been some rumors about the 8th, but when looking at the recent Pokemon Presents over the last few years, they haven't been happening on Thursdays. They've been happening on either Tuesday or Wednesday. So I'm going to assume that rumor is likely false, but I also think that it perhaps makes some sense to expect the Pokemon Presents to happen in one of the 2 first full weeks of the month. So either this week right here, 4 through 10, or 11 through 17. So really, I'm thinking either the 6th, the 7th, the 13th, or the 14th. And I'll also point out that there is a great deal of speculation that Pokemon Legends ZA, given that it's going to be a 2025 title and not even an early 2025 title it's looking like, there's a great chance that they may want to capitalize on Legends ZA coming out during the early months of Switch 2. Many reports are indicating that March 2025 may be the time Switch 2 releases. If this holds true, then Legends ZA is very likely going to coincide. And while I recognize there's a history of Pokemon Company not having a next generation version of Pokemon made available early on, usually they wait a little bit, I think through backwards compatibility and perhaps some sort of enhancement patch, they can still make Legends ZA very relevant for not just Switch 1, but also Switch 2. And so ultimately what I'm getting at here is that there might be a slightly better looking version of Legends ZA on Switch 2. And recently there's been some discussion that I myself have been taking part in that we might see the Switch 2 in an official capacity for the first time sometime in the month of August. Now, Gamescom is at the end of the month, and we're expecting some third-party announcements there potentially if Switch 2 is showcased during this month officially. And so that doesn't leave that much time in the month of August, which would have me leaning towards a Pokemon Presents happening earlier in the month as opposed to later. And then maybe during this initial Switch 2 teaser, they show just a quick glimpse of the slightly enhanced version of Legends ZA running on Switch 2. In other words, it makes a lot of sense to show off the Switch 1 version of Legends ZA first, perhaps in this upcoming Presents we're speculating on here, and then after we see another glimpse. I think there is a possibility of that. Of course, we may have to wait even longer to see Switch 2, perhaps a couple months, that is certainly possible. And maybe Legends ZA won't be seeing any sort of enhancement patch, and even if we do, they may not show that off until later next year. Regardless, considering the history of things, I'm sticking to those 4 dates I provided, the 6th, the 7th, the 13th, or the 14th of August. We shall see what actually happens. But there are other details that have surfaced about Legends ZA over these last couple months. So, you may or may not have heard that CoroCoro, a magazine that used to cover a lot of Pokemon updates over the years, has a segment on Legends ZA. Here you can see an image of it there, and then there's another one here, and here they're showing off the legends from X and Y. Perhaps an implication that they'll likely be tied to Legends ZA, which is pretty likely. I mean, when you look at the logo, it has a Zygarde cells. Very clearly, Zygarde's going to play a role. Will Xerneas and Yveltal play a role? I think there's a pretty good chance this is set in Kalos, and Legends Arceus had tons of legends as well, so I think this is a pretty safe assumption. But also there's even talk of Mega Evolutions, and we already know that Mega Evolutions are returning because the first teaser showed the Mega Evolution symbol. Clearly there's something going on with that. But from the translation of CoroCoro, they said some interesting things regarding this game. Here they say, once again, CoroCoro reiterates that this is a new Lumio city, different from the previous one from X and Y. That's to be expected. We're likely going to see a different depiction of Lumio City, especially if this is where the entire game is taking place. I imagine it'll be a lot larger, and I'm also thinking that it's going to be divided in segments as we see in the map there. Each segment seems to be marked by one of these circular areas, So that part's fairly expected. However, here they say CoroCoro points out that there is a bunch of wild Pokemon all throughout the city. And this is interesting because when we think of a city, that's not how we would usually envision seeing a whole bunch of wild Pokemon. We would assume we would see that out in the wild. But the jury's still out on how developed this city is and what time period this is, because Legends, you would assume, has to do with the past, but they showed a very futuristic form of Legends ZA, so there's definitely a lot of room for interpretation there. But the idea of seeing wild Pokemon all throughout, it definitely gets me thinking on what sort of environment we're going to be exploring here. Before, what I've theorized is that there will be Pokemon in the water areas for sure, but maybe there's going to be a lot of park areas where it will essentially function as pockets of wilderness or natural environments, and that's where a lot of Pokemon will likely be, but of course they can still have the ability to wander and be elsewhere. If there's a lot of bird Pokemon that take on the role kind of like a pigeon in the city, we can see a lot of those. There could be dogs and things like that, scrounging for morsels or what have you. So there's definitely ways they can make it work, but something I'm reminding myself of here is that in Legends Arceus, it was about establishing that initial connection with Pokemon and people. Is that still going to be the case with Legends ZA? We shall see. Now here they also say, Megas from X and Y and Oris are returning. The lore of Mega Evolution will be explored again. So it's not surprising that we'll be getting more Megas, but it's interesting that they not only mention the Megas from X and Y, but also Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. They don't necessarily have to bring those in. But since Mega Pokemon have been dormant for such a long time when it comes to the mainline games, I do think it would make sense to take this opportunity to bring them all back and give us an opportunity to enjoy all these different Mega Pokemon, and of course introduce some new ones as well. But I find this point here where they say the lore of Mega Evolution will be explored again to be interesting, because there's a theory going around that might tie into this somewhat. So Light88 on Twitter was theorizing that there may be a connection with Pokemon Snap, new Pokemon Snap, and the ruins area, because there is a part where we can see the ancient ruins and there's this wall where we see Xerneas, and there are 5 Pokemon surrounding Xerneas: Milotic, Volcarona, Steelix, Wishiwashi, and Meganium. But what you may not realize by looking at this part here, if you look carefully though, is that it almost seems to be taking on a similar shape to the map. There is a circular-like environment, and there are 5 circles dividing these different sections with a circular area in the middle. It seems to be very similar, and given this is a scene about Xerneas, one of the main legendaries from X and Y, it definitely has me wondering if there's some sort of hint here. It's no secret at this point that Game Freak likes to tease future Pokemon games in their different releases. However, an important point to make here though is that new Pokemon Snap is not a Game Freak made Pokemon game, it's a spin-off game. So we should perhaps take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, but there is some interesting depictions going on here. There is a depiction of meteors or something crashing onto this land or world or this map, and maybe there's a correlation to that and Rayquaza from the Delta episode that also had to crash through a meteor to save the world. Rayquaza had an evolution in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. We're hearing that there are going to be Megas returning not just from X and Y, but also Oris as well. Perhaps they're going to be building on this, and there will be some more lore surrounding Mega Evolutions. Perhaps Xerneas will be given a Mega Evolution alongside Yveltal, and I'm sure Zygarde, I'm not sure if they're going to go with Mega Evolution, but they'll probably also build upon the concept of its different forms, or perhaps there will also be a Mega Evolution there. Most people are probably expecting this. We're gonna get new Mega Evolutions, but it's interesting to see how there might be a connection between the ancient ruins from new Pokemon Snap and Pokemon Legends ZA with the Mega Evolutions. So here's the pattern holding that there's going to be a Pokemon Presents next month, and they show us actual gameplay of Pokemon Legends ZA, perhaps tell us more about the Mega Evolutions, maybe we get some cool hints about the lore of Pokemon and what's going on there, and perhaps also some indications that Game Freak is taking the right steps to improve the quality of the Pokemon series. But what do you make of all these different details and possible leaks and theories? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.